please welcome our moderator, Ms. Teona Kubardia, Member of the Parliament of Georgia, Member of the Committee on European Integration.
So, good afternoon, and I'm really delighted to be moderator of the last panel, and the topic is really important, not only for Georgia, but also for the EU. It is stronger union, and I will just quickly will provide you the essence of the topic, as well as the context, which is we see the war in Ukraine, which is not only against the sovereignty of Ukraine, but also the principles of sovereignty, international world order, and we see the response from the EU, which is EU enlargement. And Georgia, which was the first target of Russian aggression, and civilization choice is to become a member of the European family, in line with Ukraine and Moldova. We are on the path of the EU integration. So the main questions will be what we all have to do to move forward for the Europe and the European family, while we see not only Russian aggression in Ukraine, but increased Russian influences in Georgia. We see lack of the fulfillment of the democratic reforms from Georgian side. We know that only 3 out of 12 was fulfilled fully. And we have associated trio, which in 2018 was established in Batumi, and Madam President signed it in line with Ukraine and Moldovan leaders. And the urgency of trio to be maintained. So we will have like 8 minutes per speaker because the time is limited. And I would like to ask you firstly the question about why unity matters, and what Georgia, in line with Ukraine and Moldova, should do in order to become EU members, and while we see the Russian influences, increased influences, which is an answer to the stronger union, what should Georgia do? And also, what is your opinion, how we keep associated trio together, because it's not just a platform for us, but it is an opportunity that we all together become European Union member. What is also the prospects for Georgia on that path, and how it will affect geopolitics in total? I know that this is crazy for 8 minutes to answer this question, but let's try and let's be very, very clear and precise because of the short of the time. So I'm delighted to represent the speakers of this panel, Marketa Gregorova, who is not only European Parliament member, but friend of Georgia, Salome Samadashvili, Ambassador Salome Samadashvili, member of the Parliament and Foreign Affairs Committee, and Anna Natsrishvili, also member of the Parliament and Euro Integration Committee. Thank you very much, and I will try to follow the time, not to miss the deadline with this speech. Thank you very much, and please, I'm looking forward for your answers.
All right. Is this on? Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank not only for the very nice introduction, I do consider myself to be a friend of Georgia, but also thank you for the invitation, Madam President. And allow me also a little notion, because our panel is thematically least gendered, I would say. We are talking about Georgia and not about women in general. But I would still like to mention that as I was sitting over there and listening to all the panelists, listening to Madam President, and hearing all these amazing women talk, I realized that for Georgia and its future, currently one of the highest positioned person in the country, Madam President, is kind of fighting a sort of gendered fight against men who are trying in the leadership of the country to pull it somewhere else than its European path. So I think this is also to some extent a gendered topic, unfortunately, because I would hope that men would also want to go rather towards this rational approach. However, given this statement, I would like to try to answer all of these points, topics, and questions, for which I luckily have notes, otherwise I would probably forgot some. First of all, I wanted to mention what the EU can do or should do, and also what's the role of Georgia in it. Because I think there are three fundamental truths and facts that we need to consider. First is that what happened with Ukraine, what happened with Georgia in 2008, and what is in general happening with the world now because of Putin and his regime is actually because the EU and the Western world was unable to set limits to Putin, set borders, to say what is impossible. We did not help Georgia in 2008. We did not help Nagorno-Karabakh situation. We did not intervene in any way. And so when Putin tried last year in February to attack and overtake, and also mention Crimea, of course, overtake Ukraine as a whole, he did so because he thought we will not react again. Luckily, we finally reacted, but it's also true that we allowed it by not reacting before, not reacting sooner. So I think from now on, the reaction always needs to be from the EU very, very strong, so that Putin knows there are limits, and not only, of course, Putin. There are other authoritarians that are looking what could be theirs. The other fundamental truth is that the EU does not have an army, and it cannot really militarily protect anyone and anyone's integrity. So there is one institution, organization that can, and that is NATO. And I think that both Georgian politicians and EU politicians, and of course all the other member states of NATO, should strive for Georgia to join NATO, because I think that's what will be the protecting boulder for the future, and it's very crucial for any future talks about how to protect against Russia and others. And the last one I want to mention in this regard is that Putin's propaganda and disinformation and hybrid threats, etc., I don't believe that citizens, and especially citizens of Georgia, who are very well in knowledge of that they are occupied by Russia, and when I talk to them, they are greatly unhappy about that, that they would believe Russian propaganda. But, of course, it's not always very visible. It doesn't have a stamp. Oh, this is Russian propaganda, so please don't believe it. You know, it's very secretive, and of course it's supported also, unfortunately, by leadership of Georgia in some instances, such as the ever-repeating claim that the candidate status is not being given to Georgia because we actually in the EU want to make you a second front to the Ukrainian war. That's ridiculous. We said it again and again that this is not true, and I want to repeat it because I think it's very important to repeat it, that this is absolutely incorrect, and this is Russian propaganda. This is helping only Russia. It's not helping Georgia, it's not helping EU, it's not helping anyone than Putin. So please bear this in mind and transfer it to your other peers and colleagues who you talk to. To the TRIO, a very important topic, because I want to mention that the TRIO association is mostly for you, for the countries that are represented in the TRIO, for Moldova, for Georgia, and for Ukraine. It's for you to share know-how, it's for you to inspire each other, to ask, why did Ukraine and Moldova already get candidate status and we did not? What reforms did they already implement it, and how? In what matters are they better? And in what, of course, affairs are we better? And what can we inspire Ukraine in? For instance, in fighting Russian propaganda. And I think that it's important to bear this in mind, because when we talk about geostrategy, a lot of people in Georgia are afraid that because currently they are slightly backsliding, that there is the fear that they will not be a priority for the EU. No, you will always be a priority on its own. There are always association agreement, DCFTA, bilateral meetings, plans and everything, and we think about you unilaterally. The trio is for you to grow. And also, let me just say that historically, enlargement processes in the EU were mostly successful only when there was a conjoint of countries. I don't think that, well, there might be some instances, but there's not that many instances when a single country joined the EU successfully. And when it did so, it was a very unique situation. I think that your best shot is really with these other countries, so please bear this in mind when working in the trio panel and association. And last but not least, what can Georgia do? Of course, we know the ball's in your court now. That's obvious. There are the 12 recommendations, and we also know that the Commission currently claims that it's like thirds. Third is fulfilled, third is semi-fulfilled, and third is still not fulfilled. Some CSO of Georgia, I actually have the report here. You might have seen it. I just met them, so I have it. I love to meet civil society organizations the most. They think the situation is even worse. And we talked about this in great depth. Yes, the current Georgian government, and I will say this bluntly here because I'm a politician, so I can get a little political, right? The current Georgian government is not fulfilling them enough to get a properly candidate status. If Georgia gets candidate status, it will be because it's an important political symbol for Georgia and against Russia, but not because it's reforming well. But this is important for Georgia, because if you get candidate status without the proper reforms, will there be proper reforms after that? Will there be any sort of motivation? So please bear this in mind, pressure your government, and of course, work relentlessly, as you said in these panels so far, and I would wish you best of luck in all the work, and we in the European Union and Parliament will try to do our best, what we can do from Brussels or from Tbilisi when we visit, which I like very much. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank President Zurabishvili for organizing this important forum here in Tbilisi, and we're delighted that all you friends of Georgia could be here. I think that I would not be exaggerating if I said that whatever we are discussing at this panel, and whatever we can say, in the end, the future of Trio, future of Ukraine, future of Georgia, and Moldova is being decided in the battlefields of Ukraine right now. So Slava Ukraini, and we wish Ukraine speedy victory. Now, if you look at the history of Georgia's relationship with the European Union, it is really rather amazing how it is very deeply connected to the security environment in this region. I was Georgia's ambassador in Brussels in 2008, and I agree completely with my European colleague that the response of the world to the invasion of our country was inadequate. However, what happened as the result of 2008 war was that the European Union, first of all, understood that the spillover effects of that deteriorating security environment would be for Europe to clean up. And the Eastern Partnership Initiative came into existence as the result of 2008 war, in a sense, and this was the first meaningful engagement of the European Union with our countries. Sadly, it took another war, this time in Ukraine, to make impossible possible, because the EAP made it very clear that membership was not on the table, actually, ever, if you ask some member states in Europe. And we are really at the historical opportunity at this time, when Georgia was basically told that you will be a member of the European Union, you just really have to do your work in order to get there. It is sad and yet reality that at this time of unique historical opportunity, we also do have the government which is anti-European. I was listening to the Prime Minister of Georgia yesterday in the parliament to the extent that I could, because I think there is a limit to human capacity to listen to what we heard yesterday. And I was thinking to myself that all the things he was saying about how the European People's Party is the global war party, how the European Union is imposing on us values which are against the Georgian traditions, referring to LGBT issues, etc., etc. And I was thinking to myself, I mean, this could be Surkov or, Putin's another propagandist, only he's asking to join the European Union. And quite frankly, I know the European Union rather well. I just do not know how to succeed when you have the government which is basically trying to undermine itself and our country. So we are in the reality which was just described that, yes, Moldova and Ukraine probably will start negotiations in the end of this year, and Georgia still does not know if it will be granted, if it is granted candidate status. And there is a great danger, indeed, that trio will become duo, and the gap between Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia will widen. That is a danger. To overcome that, we need the government which will implement the reforms. And unfortunately, before the end of this year, we do not have the elections in this country. We have elections only next year. So we do have to continue. I agree with Marketa. We have to press the government that they do what they can. And I want to thank President Zurabishvili, who has been consistent in her policy of leading this country towards the EU, not least with the difficult decisions which she has taken, including pardoning Nika Gvaramia just last week and vetoing the legislation. But unfortunately, next week, the majority plans to overcome this veto and again undermining the European future. So, I don't have much time, and I want to simply send this message. For us, it is extremely important that Georgia remains on track towards the EU membership. So candidacy status decision is, of course, important. However, I think that that's true for Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova as well. We do not need candidacy status as a purgatory where we're going to stay endlessly waiting for decades to join the European Union. So Georgia needs a candidate status, but what it needs even more is the government that can deliver the reforms and lead this country actually to the European path towards membership. Because what we are concerned about is that this government, to the extent that it wants, that's under question for me, but to the extent that let's assume they want a candidacy status, they only look at it as the chip, which they want to trade in on the next elections for their success. And then what they will do after that, I think we see now, because as we speak today here, the violent political environment in this country is getting worse and worse. It is encouraged by this government. The violence against media and politicians is getting worse, and we're still 18 months away from the elections. So I'm afraid that what we are looking at is unfortunately deteriorating political environment in this country. And if you ask me, Georgia needs a candidate status. Georgia also needs free and fair elections. And Georgia needs new pro-European government, which will be a coalition government of the pro-European parties, which will lead this country not only to speedy opening of the negotiations on membership, but speedy conclusion and successful conclusion of our decades-long vocation to become part of Europe, whole and free, where is our rightful place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very happy to be part of this extraordinary conference of so many women come together and bring on the table experience, inspiration, and determination to take an action for better Georgia, for better world. And thank you, Madam President, for making this happen for the second time. I'm very hopeful that this will become a tradition in Georgia, a high-level women's conference. Well, I will speak about what Georgia should do, the so-called homework, which needs to be delivered. And unfortunately, I have to say, as a member of the parliament being involved in preparing that homework as much as opposition has leverage on this process, Georgia so far is lagging behind performing the 12 recommendations. And it's very unfortunate. It's also very unfortunate that the country which was a front runner in the associated trio is now very much behind Ukraine and Moldova in terms of democratic reforms. Why do we need trio? And I agree with Marketa a lot that we have shared challenges because of somewhat similar past, Soviet socialist past. And these are the things which are like stumbling blocks for Georgia in really creating independent, fair, modern judiciary, which will stand up for human rights, equality and dignity. This common shared bad history, bad legacy, is a stumbling block when it comes to really overcoming corruption as one of the key problems for our societies, and many others, like oligarchic governance, shrinking space for media, civil society, and freedom as such. So yes, we should give each other experience, share with each other lessons learned, and what works and what doesn't work, because this context is quite specific. We can't just transplant democratic standards. We have to find our own ways of transforming totalitarian legacy and making something modern, strong, sustainable democracies in our context. So there we can learn a lot from each other. And I'm very unhappy and disappointed that instead of looking at each other as inspiration and friends and colleagues, if you want, Georgian government is very often not trying to look at what others are doing better to learn and to take inspiration. This doesn't mean we should not keep fighting for Georgia's European and democratic future, because democratic reforms are not to please anyone, even friends and partners. It is for our citizens, first of all, that anyone in Georgia feels safe and secure when she or he goes to court to protect his or her rights. That everyone has the feeling, journalists, people here who are covering this great conference and many important news, that they feel secure when they go out there and ask critical questions. This is what we need, our country needs, our citizens need, first of all. So yes, we have to keep pressurizing the government as much as it is possible. But on the other hand, since many distinguished international guests are here, my request to you will be to also keep a very clear picture of what is happening in Georgia. We cannot only talk about polarization if we do not talk about violence in politics, about extreme shrinking space for anyone who has different opinion from the government. And we are facing threats. Like yesterday, the Prime Minister was facing threats, especially against women MPs from the parliament. If we are not talking about violence happening in the streets against political opponents, against media, against activists, anyone who is not agreeing with what the party decides. And this is the reality. So we need clear terminology when we are describing what is happening in Georgia and what is possible to come out from this situation. And yes, I think we all have to be very prepared and wary of 2024 elections, because this will be a decisive point in the modern history of Georgia. And this decision is very simple. Are we heading towards West, where Georgia belongs historically, culturally, or does Russia manage to succeed in dragging us back? And I hope very much that the resource, first of all, human capacity in Georgia, women and men of different generations will be able to raise their voice very clearly, very bravely, like it was in March against the Russian law, and say, no, this is our country. We are patrons of our country, not those who are elected for a temporary job. We are the patrons of this country. We want this country to head towards European Union, towards NATO. Very important point. Yes, in 2017, when I was the member of the Constitutional Commission, and I'm very proud of this move, I, together with a handful of people, initiated a constitutional amendment to write explicitly in the Constitution of Georgia that European integration, Euro-Atlantic integration is our foreign policy direction. And back then it seemed like, okay, it's so obvious, why do we need a constitutional provision? And now, when we see a clear deviation from this constitutionally guaranteed path, we have this guarantee, at least something to hold on and to say, look, you are going against the Constitution, you are going against the will of the nation. So every little step matters. Previous panels very much concentrated on disinformation, and I don't want to omit this topic. Disinformation is, I would say, enemy number one, because it is trying to blur the view of Georgian citizens, to blur the possibilities to see wrong and right, to see who is an enemy and who is a friend, who is a partner, to see each other, to trust each other. The point of extreme polarization, the point of disinformation is to instill distrust among citizens, so that we do not trust each other, so that we do not unite our forces, so that there are no synergies between private sector and public sector, between activists and people working in the public sector, good faith people. So that's a very serious concern. And also, not just because we are on a women's conference, but because this is a very dangerous reality. Disinformation, Russian disinformation, very often has clear anti-gender agenda. And they are targeting women. This is not by incident, because they know women have great potential to overcome crisis, to overcome conflict, to overcome polarization, and to really look for the future and, yes, find compromises, which is so necessary in our political life and in our life in general. We have to learn doing things together. So thank you again. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I hope it continues, and I hope that we will find strength to overcome disinformation and see each other and trust each other and trust in each other's possibilities to make this country a better country. Despite the fact that we are occupied, despite the fact that occupation is taking lives of our citizens, even as we speak now, and it's a lingering threat over security and safety of so many people living at the occupation line. Yes, we can do it. If we stick together, we can do it. This is what I want to leave you with, this thought. It's simple, but it's difficult to do in practice, so I hope we will be able to do it together. Thank you.
Wow. Anna, thank you. When we talk about the EU and Georgia's national interest, always after 7 and 8 of March protests, when we talk about it, the one image comes, which is a woman with the EU flag. And for me, it was very emotional when I saw 2 women awarded by a president, one from early 90s fighting against Soviet regime and for Georgia's independence, and another woman fighting for Georgia's foreign policy priority, which is a national interest and unites 90% of the population. And president also, who is fighting for this European future. So when I see so many women united together for Georgia, for Europe, I do have not only hope, but I do have beliefs that together we can do it, together with Europe. And I want to conclude this conference with this need of unity and with this women's power, that together we can push Georgia forward Europe. And I'd like to thank you, President, again for demonstrating this unity inside Georgia and demonstrating unity of Georgia outside with our Western allies. And I want to thank you for all the steps you are putting forward for Georgia's European future. Thank you very much.